Hey everybody, this is Sam. I'm here to start recording my thoughts again on the internet. Sorry I've been away for such a long time. I've been occupied really busy on some election related projects as well as, I think notably, some work on the Kavanaugh nomination. Obviously, I was working to oppose. And I actually am very encouraged despite how this has worked out. I and a lot of other people assumed from the beginning that he would probably get through. I did have a few moments of hope there, but in the end, it wasn't enough, and I'll explain the dynamics of why I think that was later on. But just let me say for now how much better I feel about how this went than how I was feeling earlier, maybe late August, early September. And I actually made another video about this for anybody who's actually watching this channel. I'm not sure how many people are, but I'm having fun regardless. Uh, I was saying before about how upset I was and worried because I think a lot of people in the party just assumed that we couldn't beat this nomination, and so they were already thinking about other things, and they weren't going to focus on this. And I viewed that as a big mistake for a couple reasons. First of all, just getting people engaged is always good for morale, and focusing on the next fight is always important, especially in the 21st century when the internet's involved, because things can scale up so quickly, which is exactly what we saw. And I knew that was possible with the Kavanaugh nomination. As a lot of people did. I wasn't the only one who saw that. And but the most notable thing that I think was at stake in this fight, beyond just seating this guy on the Supreme Court, is this cascading effect. If we hadn't really engaged in a big way on this fight, there's this whole group of people out there who are even crazier than the Republicans the Republican nominees they've already been nominating to a lot of these posts, who they probably at this point think they were before this nomination thought, oh, we can't nominate these people. The Democrats would put up a crazy opposition to it. And if we had just let Kavanaugh through with only token opposition, then I wonder whether they wouldn't have reevaluated that and said, oh, you know what, maybe we can get this outright fascist nomination through. Maybe we can get this corporate tool through that is so obviously a corporate tool that we haven't bothered to try with these people before. Or just someone who's so conservative that they just don't match what politicians will find within the mainstream. And I think after this nomination, the biggest net positive that's right, there's a lot of possibilities after the way this nomination went down, but the definite is that they definitely do not think the Democrats are just going to take this lying down, which is huge, so huge. It makes sure that they know that every fight, every inch they want to take of ground, to use a military analogy, which I don't like to do, but politics as a substitute for violence, a literal substitute for violence, according to political theory that goes back hundreds and thousands of years in some cases, is an apt metaphor. So every inch, so using a war metaphor, every inch of ground they take, we're going to fight for every inch. So that is a really positive thing to come out of this. And I think it's important to note that in the long run, the people who are likely to win a political fight are the people who want it most, and that's over the course of many years, of course. But yeah, it's important to realize that for a long time, conservatives have wanted the judiciary more than the progressive side. They focused on it more. They focused more resources on it. They have more resources in general. The conservative side has always had more resources than the liberal side, but they've focused much more of their intellectual capital on it as well. And so I do think that may be a change that's going to happen, which I'm hopeful. Knock on wood. My desk is made of wood. Okay, so putting that aside for a moment, let's talk about the fallout here. So I actually think that despite winning the nomination, despite being able to confirm him, the GOP is a big loser in this fight from where they thought they might be, because they were forced to accept a nominee who is deeply flawed and vulnerable to all kinds of things, including investigations and possibly even impeachment based on what's found in those investigations. They were forced into a situation where they couldn't back down because their base would hold them accountable for backing down. They had someone who they didn't want in the first place. I mean, he was on Trump's list, but he was the one on the list who insiders know was not very well vetted. Everybody who works in politics knows that he was the least vetted out of the potential candidates. So they really didn't know they were getting with him, but Trump nominated him anyway. I think because of his views on executive power, but you can speculate all you want on that. But they nominated somebody who was not that well vetted, and now, and then once they figured out that there was some stuff in his past that could be disqualifying, and they couldn't jettison him and go with somebody else because the timeline was too short, and the base would be hugely disappointed if they backed down to the liberals, So they had to, basically, it was a political imperative for them to confirm somebody who could be vulnerable to impeachment later. And the only thing that stopped that proceeding of getting to a place where we would know for a fact that he was not tenable long term as a justice, is if they stopped the investigation, which is exactly what they did. They shut it down real hard. Whatever the news reports say, there was a lot of involvement from the executive branch, and they shut it down as hard as they possibly can. And they knew there was stuff in there, and that is the truth. So whatever you're hearing from the crazed right or the crazed left, there is stuff in there, and they made sure that everybody could not look at it. Bottom line. So anyway, so getting back to the main point here, they have now someone who they've created this conservative Supreme Court majority that has a timeline on it. I mean, who knows when he and perhaps others on the court are going to be impeached, or whatever's the lowest bar lift to get rid of him and others over sexual assault. And sexual assault will be the organizing principle through which we're going to get rid of, I think, a lot of judges over the next several decades, whether it's through impeachment or other means. That there will be other judges nominated by both parties and who have been a part of the patriarchal structure that let men get away with whatever they want, and trained men that they were entitled to women's bodies, which is a huge part of our culture. Huge part. And of course it touched the judiciary, just like it touched everywhere else. And a lot of the people who get nominated to be judges are people who grow up, like Brett Kavanaugh, with very few limits on their behavior as young men, because they grow up rich, with all these institutions laid out for them to inviting them in, and there's little scrutiny of the way they act because they are rich and their parents are rich and their parents are well connected, and they just ascend the rungs of leadership. And that's been the norm for how most Americans end up. Most Americans who are in positions of power end up there because of that dynamic, and that's why you see mostly men in positions of power, and you see dynasties building up over time because families, grease the way for their young progeny to make it through. That's why George W. Bush was president. He wouldn't have been president if not for that dynamic. It's exactly the same thing. He went through the same system Brett Kavanaugh went through. So I think that there will be a major piece of accountability. I think in the end it will be pursued by Democrats, but it won't be limited to just Republicans getting iced by this. It's going to be Democrats too, and we're just going to have to clean out the entire judiciary. And it's because of Brett Kavanaugh, so welcome to the new future. All right, so that's a big win for the Democrats as well, and for progressive thought in this country. And I'm not trying to downplay the negative side of this, which is huge, but I guess we'll see how it plays out over the next few years, and just know that what the future is in our hands, the collective public, and we can do whatever we want. So nothing is ever decided permanently. All right, so now I want to take a step back, because the it's important to put all of this in context. And I mentioned before about how the Republicans couldn't back down on Kavanaugh, even though they knew that he was a flawed candidate who eventually, when they don't have all the levers of power and they can't shut down the investigations, eventually it will become clear to everybody that he is a terrible human. The backdrop to that is that is some sort of a mirror image on the left as well, and the reason why I think you saw a lot of senators pursuing behavior that some would deem, like hysterical or crazy, or they're just a departure from previous behavior of just a stately Senate, and instead pursuing a more activist posture and a more aggressive posture in opposing Kavanaugh. And I think that the dynamic here is that neither party do the most active people who regularly vote for politicians of that party. Neither of those groups of people, and you can call them the base, right? This is a shorthand that people use, the Republican base, the Democratic base, right? But it's much more complicated than that. It's just, what we're really talking about is the most active people, the people who are involved the most, spending the most time, thinking about acting, worrying about politics, and they're always voting, and they're getting involved in local committee meetings, that type of thing. Neither of those groups of people trust the congressional leadership in their party to represent them very well right now. And that's been growing for many, many years, but it is... and because I grew up in a time when this is sort of correcting for my own bias. I grew up in a time when that was a growing dynamic, and I sort of viewed it as the norm. And it's not that there's never been a thread in American politics of people being untrusting of their leaders. In fact, I think it's been pretty much a constant, but it's growing in pitch and fervor, and I overlooked it, I think, myself, and a lot of people did, because it's so the norm, right? Everybody knows that the public doesn't trust their politicians, but I think that it is much deeper than that, in that the public is really broad. Most people in the public even if they do vote, don't actually pay attention that much to the details of politics, and I'm not here to hand-wring about that. I think that it's just a natural way that sometimes it breaks down. I don't think it's positive. I'm not someone who believes that it's okay for a political aristocracy to be in charge. I'm a Democrat. I believe in democracy, and I think everybody should be involved as much as they want to, and we should be encouraging people to get involved. I also think that the dynamic of our country over many, many, many years is that only a few people are really that involved, and they have been usually tied in pretty closely to the power structure of the parties. So when there is a sea change in opinion, and things move very quickly in the opinion of that elite group, and I use elite here to mean people who are well connected to the political structure, not elite meaning rich or anything like that, though there's a lot of overlap there. But when that elite group has an opinion, it's reflected very quickly among the actual small few leaders of the party, because they're so tied in to the communities they represent. But I think that has changed significantly over my lifetime, and we're at the point now where the people who represent these political parties and are leaders of these political parties, both of the major political parties, the group of people who are actually most active don't trust the leadership, and that is a big change. And I actually think that the reason why it's happened, and this is something that people don't talk about a lot, is because the people who are most active in politics, that group has actually grown a lot. I would say I don't have any data on this because nobody's bothered to study this with any resources or serious methodology, but I would be willing to bet it's between 5 and 10 times as many people as were previously involved are now involved in a big way. And once you get people paying attention, and you get a whole new group of people paying attention, that is a really, really big deal. And it unbalances the power structure significantly, because all those people, if you're not tied in with them, all these new people who are coming in, you're in major trouble as a leader, because then you have no intelligence about, you have no information about what your people are thinking. The people who are not ostensibly your supporters, you don't know what, you have no control over what they're doing. You can't move them. You can't convince them. It's major change, and it's still a small number of people, right? It's important to realize that our country is very, very large. We have, what, 350 million people in this country. So if and let's say you only had really 100,000, 200,000 people who pay very close attention and are actually involved in an active way in our politics previously. In the last few decades, that's probably increased to 500,000 or a million people. And so, in the grand scheme of things, compared to the massive country size overall of 325, 350 million, that doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're talking about the scale of just the number of constituents that the average political leader has to deal with, it's huge increase, and it leads to a total scrambling of the way that hierarchy has worked in parties. And that's why I think you see the some dynamics of what's happening with Trump. I mean, obviously there's a whole lot more going on there, but some of the dynamics going on with Trump and the Republican Party, and especially with the Tea Party movement that presaged the Republican move to Trump style politics. And then on the Democratic side, you see people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ayanna Pressley, and there are a whole bunch of other people who I'm not thinking of the names of, but they're actually winning a lot of the Democratic primaries for House of Representatives this cycle, and it's really cool to watch because those are people who are really becoming masters at dealing with a much larger scale group of super involved people in politics. It's not about the median voter. It's about the people who actually are spending 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, active, staying involved in politics. And that number is so much larger than it used to be, that it really takes a new group of people possibly to balance that and create a stable platform for constituent service, for political relationships and political leadership. And one of the things that I'm most looking forward to over the next 10 years is watching and helping that group of super talented young political leaders. Young, not because, youth is better. Young because you kind of have to be young in order for your brain to be plastic enough, to be malleable enough to comprehend and encapsulate and adapt to this new political environment where you've got so many more people who are actively involved in politics. And that's wonderful. I'm so excited to be alive at this time, even though things from my side seem very dark right now. And I think that there's a huge, when institutions get broken apart and when things get disrupted, that's an opportunity to build new stuff. Every crisis is an opportunity, and it's really exciting. And to people who may not agree with me, be excited, because we got a lot of really good stuff going on in the Democratic Party right now. And despite the frustration, which I also feel a lot of the time. And to people who don't agree with me, I would say, you've got stuff going on over where you are too, and I think there are going to be opportunities to work together, just among the people who understand how to deal with politics in the modern age, and so let's start a dialogue, because it's really important to understand generational leadership. That we're the ones who are going to be movers and shakers in this new era, and we got to just talk to each other, to compare notes and have open channels for negotiation when we have to resolve fights. There's a fight, and then there's a resolution, and that's all a big negotiation posture, and that's how politics works. So really looking forward to the next 20, 30 years in politics, and really excited to be a part of it. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Please feel free to comment, and I'll try to engage with all the people I can. And thank you so much for watching. I've missed making these videos the last month or so that I haven't had the time, and I hope to continue to do this well into the future. So thank you very much. Bye.